My name is Jennifer. I am Kilmar's wife. He is a father, a son, a brother, and a proud member of CASA and SMART Union member who has dedicated himself to make our family's American dream reality. That dream was shattered on March 12th when he was abducted and disappeared by the United States government in front of our 5-year-old child. Today is 34 days after his disappearance, and I stand before you filled with spirit that refuses to bring down. I will not stop fighting until I see my husband alive. Kilmar, if you can hear me, stay strong. God hasn't forgotten about you. Our children are asking, when would you come home? And I pray for the day I tell them the time and date that you'll return. As we continue through Holy Week, my heart aches for my husband, who should have been here leading our Easter prayers. Instead, I find myself pleading with the Trump administration and the Bukele administration to stop playing political games with the life of Kilmar. Our family is torn apart during this scary time, and our children miss their dad so much. Despite the challenges we continue to face with the U.S. and the Salvadorian government, I hope that the strength of faith and the resilience within us will keep us standing after all the punches we continue to receive. Our ability to fight back against these governments are testimonies to the spirit of fight and restraint that God has given us. We will continue standing strong, and we will never give up on you, Kilmar. Even though my heart is heavy, I find hope and strength in those around me. I felt an overwhelming support from our communities, our brothers and sisters from CASA, leaders and members from SMART.
President Trump is also advancing his peace through strength policy.
Who continue to stand with us. And I pray that the same community strength that has lifted me flows through those judges supporting her to bend the power towards justice. Kilmar needs to come home, and it's time we see how exact this will be fulfilled. Enough is enough. My family can't be robbed from another day without seeing Kilmar. This administration has already taken so much from my children's, from Kilmar's mother, brother, sisters, and me. Thank you.
Answer that question.
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country.
Soft
he had been
pretzel crust and
illegally in our
delicious cheddar
country.
cheese sauce.
And in
Pretzel crust is back at Little
2019,
Caesars.
two
Yep,
courts,
it's
an
all Brian
immigration
can
court
talk about.
and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane. So will you return him?
And you are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. Can you just also respond to that question? Because, you know, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant, because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question also, please?
Yes, gladly.
So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As 2 immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So he had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States and had to be returned because of the foreign terrorist designation. This issue was then, by a district court judge, completely inverted, and a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So you don't plan
But
to
the
ask for
Supreme
a
Court's
to get
asking
him back?
to.
And
Is that-
what was the ruling in the Supreme Court, Steve? Was it 9-0?
Yes, it was a 9-0
In our favor?
in our favor against the district court ruling, saying that no district court has the power to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. As Pam said, the ruling solely stated that if this individual, at El Salvador's sole discretion, was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a second time.
Well,
No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it, per the court, can only be directed to him.
I asked
¿Usted lo
President
liberaría,
Bukele, what is
Presidente
can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm suppose you're not suggesting that I smuggle terrorists into the United States, right?
It's
I mean,
always
how can I smuggle, how can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not gonna do it. It's like, I mean, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
But you can release him inside El Salvador.
Yeah, but I'm not releasing, I mean, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. I mean, we just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal,
Yeah,
released into
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick, these are sick people. Marco, do you have something to say about it?
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin, except for Venezuela that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President, no, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago, and they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over, and that's why nobody watches you anymore? You have no credibility. Please, go ahead.
President Trump, thank you very much. How many illegal criminals are you planning on exporting to El Salvador? And President Bukele, how many are you willing to take from the U.S.?
As many as possible. And I just asked the president, it's this massive complex that he built, jail complex. I said, can you build some more of them, please? As many as we can get out of our country that were allowed in here by incompetent Joe Biden through open borders. Open borders. You probably hear open borders and you can't even understand it, because nobody can understand. Nobody smart or with common sense can understand it. So we have millions of people that should not be in this country that are dangerous, not just people, because we have people, but we have millions of people that are murderers, drug dealers. They've been allowed to come into our country by other countries that were very smart. When they heard that this very low IQ president, and by the way, I took my cognitive exam as part of my physical exam, and I got the highest mark, and one of the doctors said, "Sir, I've never seen anybody get that kind of, that was the highest mark." I hope you're happy with that, although they haven't been bugging me too much to take a cognitive, but I did do my physical and it was released. I hope you're all happy with it. I notice there's no question, so probably you are. But the cognitive, they said to me, "Sir, would you like to take a cognitive test?" I said, "Did Biden take one?" "No." "Did anybody take one?" "No, not too many people took them." I said, what about Obama? Did he take one?" "No, he didn't take one either." I said, "Let me be the only one to take one." But I've actually taken them 3 times already. I like taking them because they're not too tough for me to take. But we had a great physical exam, so I know you're going to ask that. And the doctors, who are total professionals, Walter Reed Medical Center, they're great people. And I visited a soldier that was badly wounded, incredible soldier, lost his leg, and spent a lot of time with him. I mean, great with his mother, and it was really a very great thing. They do a phenomenal job. I just want to say, Walter Reed, I was there for, 5-6 hours. You were there with me. But I took a full physical, and it came out perfecto, so that's good. It means you've got me for a little longer.
Would you also be willing to pay for those facilities to be opened if new ones were going to be built?
I'd do something, we'd help them out, yeah, we help them. They're great facilities, very strong facilities, and they don't play games. I'd like to go a step further. I mean, I said it to Pam, I don't know what the laws are, we always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country, but you'll have to be looking at the laws on that, Steve, okay?
President,
How essential is it for you guys to be locking up these prisoners? And do you think more presidents should follow suit like you guys as far as taking a hard stance on crime here in the United States?
Well, I do. I think everybody has to. I mean, the president said it better than anybody. He said, you have liberty and you have to have liberty, but to have liberty, not everybody is going to be good. And, some are bad because they're sick. They're mentally deranged. They're bad.
Why do you think
Then you have to take them, if you're going to have a country, you're going to have to take those people out. And we've been doing that. But this was like an unforced error, they would call it, where we had people that may hate our country, or maybe they're just stupid people. I think they're probably stupid people more so. A lot of people said they did it for the vote. But I did better with Hispanic people than they did, because they always use Hispanic. I did better. You people love me. I saw my poll numbers in your country up through the roof, right? 91%. No, some people think they do it for the vote. But they don't have to do it for the vote. They cheat, they're professional cheaters. That's about the only thing they do well. So we just have had a great relationship, and it's become bigger because of a strange thing that happened. I came back. We had no war in Ukraine. We had no war we had no October 7th Middle East problem. We had nothing. We had no inflation. We didn't have the Afghanistan, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, the Afghanistan, not withdrawing, because I would have been out, I had it all set to bring people out with dignity and pride. That was the worst, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, Afghanistan. We didn't have any of that. You wouldn't have had the war with Russia, Ukraine. You wouldn't have had the Middle East problem because Iran was broke. They had no money because we had secondary sanctions on and lots of other sanctions. And now every single thing, got a problem with Iran, but I'll solve that problem. That's almost an easy one. We got to solve a war that should have never started, Ukraine and Russia, and we'll get that solved. And we have to solve problems, and we already solved inflation. If you look at the numbers are incredible, actually. stock market's up, and we're not letting other countries take advantage of this country like they have for the last 40 years. So thank you very much. You have a question, please?
Mr. President, thank you so much. You scored another major investment win this morning when NVIDIA pledged to build its AI supercomputer, the first time ever, right here in the United States.
Thank you. That's a question I like. That's true.
What is your reaction to this announcement, sir, and how will this positively benefit Americans across the entire country?
Well, it's one of the biggest announcements you'll ever hear, because NVIDIA, as you know, controls that almost the entire sector, which is one of the most important sectors in the world, between chips and semiconductors and everything else. And they're the biggest. And the other biggest we already have coming in is spending $300 billion, as you know. They announced 2 weeks ago. But NVIDIA is so highly respected. And this was an announcement that a lot of people, I knew it was going to happen, but not to the extent that it happened. It's big. And the reason they did it is because of the election on November 5th and because of a thing called tariffs. As I say, the most beautiful word in the dictionary. After love, God, relationship. The press actually hit me and said, tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. What about family, love, God? So I got hit even on that. You understand? I said, okay. So now I say it's my 5th most favorite word because they get you on anything. But no, that NVIDIA, it's one of the great companies of the world, modern, super modern companies, controls segments that nobody, sort of controls the world in a sense, and they are coming in here in the biggest way with hundreds of billions of dollars. Not like millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, and I'm honored by it. And I want to thank Jensen and all of the people that we deal with. They're great people, they're brilliant people. And without tariffs, they wouldn't be doing it. Okay? Thank you very much. Yeah,
Are
please.
you considering additional sanctions against Russia after their latest attack? And do you have an update on the rate and when you might announce
Well, I
semiconductor
already have
tariffs?
sanctions on Russia. I put them there. If you remember, Nord Stream 2, that's the big pipeline that goes through Europe. I stopped it. That's Russia's pipeline, the largest pipeline, I think, in the world. Goes to Germany. And I stopped it. And when Biden came in, he approved it. And then they say, oh, I'm friendly with Russia. No. Putin said, if you're my friend, I'd hate to see you when you're my enemy. I stopped the biggest economic job they ever had. I stopped it cold, right? It was dead. You know that, right? And Biden came in and he immediately approved it. What was that all about? And it's a pipeline that takes care of a lot of the needs. Now, it was a very controversial thing, but I stopped it and Biden approved it. Question?
On tariffs,
No, not you. Not
We're supposed to have an update today on potential semiconductor tariffs and potentially pharmaceuticals. Semiconductor tariffs and potentially pharmaceuticals. Any update on
Pharmaceuticals,
that?
we're going to do. We don't make our own drugs, our own pharmaceuticals. We don't make our own drugs anymore. The drug companies are in Ireland and they're in lots of other places, China. And all I have to do is impose a tariff. The more, the faster they move in. The higher the tariff, it's very simple. It's inversely proportional. The higher the tariff, the faster they come. And yeah, we're going to be doing that. That's going to be like we have on cars. We have, as you know, a 25% tariff on cars. We have a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. And that's what that category fits right now.
Do you have a percentage in mind and a timeline?
I have a timeline, yeah, not too distant future. And we're doing it because we want to make our own drugs. We're doing it because we want to make our own steel and aluminum, lumber, other things. And they're all coming in. We have record numbers, $7 trillion. Since I announced, like a month and a half ago, since I came in, we have over $7 trillion being invested in the country. We didn't have $1 trillion. We didn't have $500 billion for some of these guys. They didn't know what the hell they were doing. So we have the largest investment that we've ever heard of, and we're only 2 months in. And that'll continue at levels that you've never seen before. That's what's going to happen. And even the stock market's up today. We also had, you know, a lot of people didn't say it the way it was. We had the largest gain in the stock market in history on every single category last week. That was a nice game because we were getting a little hit because people didn't understand the power of our country economically if you use it right. Do you have something to say on that, JD?
Yes, sir. I mean, look, for 40 years, we have lost manufacturing capacity. Workers have seen their wages stagnate. And some of the most critical things that we need, from the pharmaceuticals, the drugs that we give to our children, the antibiotics that we give to our kids, to the weapons that we actually need to fight a war, if God forbid we had to fight a war, we don't make enough of that stuff. And so President Trump ran explicitly on changing that. Yes, as the president mentioned, it caused a little bit of disruption in the market, but I actually think over the long term, workers are going to benefit, stocks are going to go up, American businesses are going to benefit as we reinvest and reindustrialize our country.
And the auto workers and the Teamsters and all of the unions, you know, not traditionally Republican, but I'm winning those unions by, we're up 40, 50 points on the Democrats. They're losing everything. They're losing everything because they just have policies that are not believable. They fight for policies that are 5% popular, and nobody knows who the 5% are. I mean, nobody can find the 5%. But if you go back to Ohio, and by the way, we have the great championship team from Ohio coming in today, right?
Very big day.
And that's going to be a little bit later. And that'll be, if you want to stick around, I'll introduce you to some nice people. You'll see some very large people, right? You'll see some people that even you have not seen people like this. These are big, these are 6'7", 380 pounds with no fat. Okay, that's pretty good, right? But the team, the national championship team, is being honored today at the White House, so that'll be exciting. If you're around, you want to stay around, I'll have you up there. You can tell them all about your prison, how you have to behave. Okay. Who else?
Exemptions on electronics.
You said yesterday that you're making a decision on Iran very quickly. What do you mean by that? Is that a decision to strike Iran?
They have to solve their problem very quickly. Iran wants to deal with us, but they don't know how. They really don't know how. We had a meeting with them on Saturday. We have another meeting scheduled next Saturday. I said, that's a long time. You know, that's a long time. So I think they might be tapping us along. But Iran has to get rid of the concept of a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. He can't have a nuclear weapon. Nobody can have. We can't have anybody having nuclear weapons. You know, we can't have nuclear weapons. And I think they're tapping us along because we're so used to dealing with stupid people in this country. And I had Iran perfect. You had no attacks. You would have never had October 7th in Israel, the attack by Hamas. Because Iran was broke. They were stone cold broke when I was president. And I don't want to do it. I want them to be a rich, great nation. The only thing is, one thing, simple. It's really simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon. And they got to go fast because they're fairly close to having one. And they're not going to have one. And if we have to do something very harsh, we'll do it. And I'm not doing it for us. I'm doing it for the world. And these are radicalized people, and they cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Does that include a potential strike on Iranian nuclear facilities?
Of course it does.
And just a follow-up question, a clarification. You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized immigrants?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What, do you think there's a special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too. And I'm all for it because we can do things with the president for less money and have great security. And we have a huge prison population. We have a huge number of prisons, and then we have the private prisons, and some are operated well, I guess, and some aren't. But he does a great job with that. We have others that we're negotiating with too. But no, if it's a homegrown criminal, I have no problem. Now, we're studying the laws right now. Pam is studying. if we can do that, that's good. And I'm talking about violent people. I'm talking about really bad people. Really bad people. Every bit as bad as the ones coming in. And I made the statement when I heard about this a long time ago now, 4 years ago. When I heard that this guy was having open borders, I said every single criminal from all over the world is going to be dumped into our country. And that's what happened. Jails, the jails of the Congo were emptied out. The jails of Venezuela were emptied out. And you know what happened? Their crime went way down. But now Venezuela has other problems. You know what the problem is? They have no money.
Yeah.
Because I shut off their oil, and we put secondary tariffs because they're not doing what's right over there. They know what to do. We spoke to them. I spoke to them. They know what to do. But they have no money. Venezuela has no money. But Iran had no money, and Iran behaved so beautifully. And then Biden took all those secondary tariffs on. I told China, you can't buy oil. If you buy oil from Iran, China, I told it to President Xi, then we no longer want you to do business with the United States of America. And those ships disappeared from that harbor so quickly. China. Get along great with China.
Are the talks with Iran productive? Do you want to continue that? The talks with Iran, do you believe those are productive? Do you want to continue that?
I think Iran could be a great country as long as it doesn't have nuclear weapons. If they have nuclear weapons, they'll never get a chance to be a great country. They will never get a chance. It won't even come to us.
Sir, on tariffs.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yesterday you mentioned short-lived product exemptions. Which specific products are you considering, and how long is short-lived? Weeks, months?
I'm looking at something to help some of the car companies where they're switching to parts that were made in Canada, Mexico, and other places, and they need a little bit of time because they're going to make them here, but they need a little bit of time. So I'm talking about things like that.
What about any Apple products, other cell phones?
Look, I'm a very flexible person. I don't change my mind, but I'm flexible. And you have to be. You just can't have a wall and you'll only go. No, sometimes you have to go around it, under it, or above it. There'll be maybe things coming up. I speak to Tim Cook. I helped Tim Cook recently in that whole business. I don't want to hurt anybody, but the end result is we're going to get to the position of greatness for our country. We're the greatest economic power in the world if we're smart. If we're not smart, we're going to hurt our country very badly. We lost with China over the Biden years trillions of dollars on trade. Trillions of dollars. And he let them fleece us. And we can't do that anymore. And you know what? I don't blame China at all. I don't blame President Xi. I like him. He likes me. I mean, you know, who knows? Who the hell cares?
Do you have any updates on talks?
But you know what?
China?
What?
Do you have any updates with talks with China?
No, let me just tell you this. I don't blame China. I don't blame Vietnam. I see their meeting today. Is that wonderful? That's a lovely meeting. They're meeting, like, trying to figure out how do we screw the United States of America. Don't forget, the European Union was formed to do just that. The European Union was formed to hurt the United States and on trade. And they get us on NATO because they don't pay their bills. But now, since I got involved, they have been paying their bills. I took in over $600 billion for NATO. Nobody took in anything. I mean, they were all delinquent. They had 8 nations out of 28 paid their bills. The rest of them were way delinquent. And I said, if you don't pay your bills, we're not going to protect you anymore. And the money poured in over 600. The Secretary General last week made that statement. He said, I've never seen anything like it. We couldn't get anybody to pay because the United States was footing the bill for NATO. Well, we got hurt there, and we got hurt on trade, likewise, European Union. And they've got to come to the table, and they're trying to. They're trying to. But the European Union has taken terrible advantage. They don't take our food products. They don't take our cars. We have millions of their cars, BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, many others. They come in by the millions. They don't take. There are no Chevrolets in Munich, I can tell you that. I said to Angela Merkel, and when she was there, as she was letting millions of people infiltrate Germany, which was not so good we would call them illegal immigrants, but she made them legal. But I said to her, and I get along with her very well, I said, how many Chevrolets do we have in Munich or Frankfurt? Why, none, Donald, none. I said, you're right. And yet we take in millions and millions of cars. No, those days are over. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Mr. President, do you have any comment on the FTC's case against Meta and Mark Zuckerberg?
Hey, Stephen, how are you? Hey, I'm good, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Who wants to go first?
I'll ask, do you plan on ramping up or does the administration plan on ramping up deportations to El Salvador? And how many people do you want El Salvador to take from the United States?
Well, as an example, there are thousands of either trained Nicaragua members left in this country or their affiliates and associates. So obviously some portion of those will be going to El Salvador as part of our effort to eradicate this foreign terrorist organization from the United States. But there's no upper limit to the agreement. We're going to continue to send foreign terrorist aliens to El Salvador as well as to many other countries.
I
think you were first, I think.
Is the president asking President Bukele today Garcia back to the U.S.?
Well, again, to be very clear about this, the Supreme Court ruled that the district court cannot, obviously, compel us to conduct diplomacy or foreign policy with another nation. And so they overturned the district court order. And they said very clearly that the district court, it was actually a unanimous ruling, overreached in that ruling. I'm not going to reveal any head of state conversations or conversations at the State Department or the lower level. But the important point that we all agree on is that he's an El Salvadorian. That is his country of nativity and citizenship. He is an illegal alien in the United States. He has no lawful right to be here. He was issued a final order of removal from this country. And so it's up to El Salvador and to the government and the people of El Salvador what the fate of their own citizens is. We can't extradite citizens of foreign countries to our country over the objection of those countries. Obviously, to do that would be a monstrous violation of international law. We can't go into other countries and kidnap their citizens and then take them back into our country. That's up to El Salvador and their own.
To send him back, right?
But it's their own citizen, right? So remember, this whole entire conversation has been wrong from the beginning because nobody was mistakenly deported anywhere. That's like the big fact that all of you, most of you have gotten wrong. No one was mistakenly sent anywhere. The only mistake that was made is a lawyer put an incorrect line in a legal filing and they've since been relieved of duty. He is El Salvadorian. He is an illegal alien. He was deported to El Salvador. I would welcome anyone here to tell me what country they think we should be sending El Salvadorian illegal aliens to.
Didn't a judge order that he not be deported to El Salvador 5 years ago?
So what you're referring to is an immigration judge. So that's Article 2, not Article 3. So there was no Article 3 restraint on his removal. A withholding of removal order, first of all, as I'm sure you know, does not eliminate the deportation order, right? We all agree on that. So his status was he's an illegal alien who's been ordered deported, which means he can be indefinitely detained and removed to any other country in the world, right? He can be sent to literally any country on the face of the earth. But the preference, general matter, is to deport someone to their home country, right? In this case, El Salvador. Because he is a member of a foreign terrorist organization, withholding orders don't apply to FTOs for obvious reasons. So if you had an illegal alien, say from Syria, who's a member of ISIS, they can't apply for withholding of removal. So that principle applies here. Furthermore, the gang that he said was going to persecute him, so this theory that he's an MS-13 and there's this rival gang, the 18th Street gang, doesn't exist anymore in El Salvador. So the entire concept is false. But again, when the media talks about the idea that there was a mistaken removal, it implies to, I think, a normal listener, the wrong person was sent somewhere. He's an illegal alien from El Salvador. Where was he sent? To El Salvador. Where does he belong? In El Salvador.
Right? It's different
he belongs,
sending someone home and sending them into a prison that they could remain in for
It is
life.
up to El Salvador how to handle the process for their own citizens. Again, what you seem to be asking us to do is to change the government and the laws of El Salvador. So if we deport somebody back to, for example, Syria, should we be closely involved on a day-to-day basis with the Syrian government, detailing that person's life and future? If we deport, say, 100,000 people back to Haiti, should we open a case file on each of those 100,000 people and ask every day, what's their housing situation? What's their healthcare situation? What might they need? What might they want? Once someone's out of our country, that becomes the problem of their host country, not our country. These people chose to invade us. So there's a lot of concern from the corporate media about the invaders, but they chose to invade us. It's our responsibility to return them back to where they came from or another country willing to take them.
Is the president going to ask for him to be returned to the United States or not? Like, yes or no?
So first of all, it's not a question for me to answer, but I think that the assumption that underlies the question is what needs to be corrected, which is that there was no mistake that was made. He was sent, so what, let me ask you, so what do you think would happen to him if he came back to this country? As your understanding of immigration laws, what do you think would happen?
But I'm just asking
it's important to know. You're asking a lot of questions. You're all asking a lot of questions about this, and you all seem to care about it a lot. So let's see if any of you have researched anything about this issue at all. Can anyone here tell me what would happen to the illegal alien from El Salvador if he came back to the United States? Does anyone here know? Does anyone want to guess? Any of you?
He could be with his family.
Does any of you know the answer to the question? Legally, what would happen if he came back here? Does any of you know? Any of you?
Do you really believe the Supreme Court?
I'm talking.
Do you
now.
really believe the Supreme Court doesn't?
I'm talking now.
Doesn't think he should be returned? Why was it unanimous?
You're done. Does any of you know the answer to the question? Does any of you? You've been talking about it for days.
All would deport him again. No.
He would be arrested.
Okay.
He'd be put in confinement. He would be deported the second time to El Salvador again, because there's no withholding order for an alien who's a member of a foreign terrorist organization, number one. Number two is the gang that he's a member of doesn't exist in El Salvador anymore. So what you're asking for is to be deported twice. But additionally, if we chose to pretend, just pretend, that the withholding order was real, he would be deported to a different country. So, for example, he could be deported to Egypt. So I'm just trying to understand, is it your view, in other words, you have to find a country that would be willing to take a MS-13 member from El Salvador. So I'm trying to understand from you all is, so if he came back and under our laws, he was then deported to Egypt or to Somalia, would you then be saying, great, I'm so glad that you deported him to another country? Is that what you'd all be saying? Like, do you understand our immigration laws at all? But the premise of your question, the gentlemen, the return, guys, do you know the difference between a deportation order and a withholding order? Do you know the difference? Any of you, please. Do you?
Well, we're not in the government.
But you couldn't even spend 72 hours over the weekend learning the distinction, even though you've been writing and talking about it this whole time.
Stephen, we're not going anywhere. On the gold cards.
Just raise your hand. Does any of you know the difference between a deportation order and a withholding order?
My question is, how do you know that he's a member of MS-13? The White House has repeatedly said according to intelligence.
By the way, according with our government and his government. In other words, his government has confirmed based on their own intelligence that he's a member of MS-13. First of all, do you dispute that he's an illegal alien?
What's that?
Do you dispute that he's an illegal alien?
No.
Okay. And do you dispute that as an illegal alien, you have the right to deport him?
He went through
the legal process. So I want to be very. Okay. What I'm getting from this conversation, which is educational for me, is that not one person in the media knows the difference between a deportation order and a withholding order. Is that a fair statement? You're learning about this all for the first time right now? I guess so. Okay. So the deportation order means the judge has said he must be deported from the country. He has no right to remain here any longer. He must be removed from the country. So his only options are to be deported to his home country or another country. That's it. There's no other option. He doesn't get to stay here. He doesn't get to live here. He has no future here. He has no right to be here. He's an illegal alien. So when you keep saying return, because you've been spun up by the open borders advocates, you all seem to be operating under the illusion that he would be able to come to the United States and just continue to live here illegally. That's not an option available to him. His only choices in life are to live in El Salvador or to live in another country. That's it. There's no other option, legally or otherwise, because he came to our country illegally. Do you understand that?
Stephen, can I ask, as a matter of policy, does the administration believe that immigration judges, because they're under DOJ, that their orders can be overruled by what the administration wants? Is that a general matter of policy?
Well, actually, so specifically, is the Attorney General has authority to overrule the immigration courts, and that's actually by statute, yes. Other questions?
Stephen, on the gold card, the President and Secretary Lutnick have suggested they're lining up applicants already. How many people do you expect to be tagged to this program when the President announces it this week, if he actually announces it this week?
I'll let Secretary Lutnick provide that update, but I appreciate that.
White House administration is going to deport 1 million undocumented people?
Much more than that. Much more.
Stephen, also of the 10 alleged gang members that Secretary Rubio said were sent to El Salvador over the weekend, what sort of due process did they get as mandated by the Supreme Court?
Well, you're talking about the alien enemies?
Yes, the alien.
So first of all, a number of those are MS-13. So again, those are just standard removals of El Salvadorians to El Salvador. And without,
what evidence did you provide that they were MS-13?
Okay, so we seem to be confused about this. The illegal aliens from El Salvador, again, get deported to El Salvador. Do you all appreciate that like tens of thousands of El Salvadorians have been deported to El Salvador? You seem to be under the impression that El Salvadorians living in our country illegally just get to stay here. They don't. They get arrested and deported. Then the fact that they're MS-13 just puts an extra priority on our deporting them. But we would deport someone to El Salvador regardless of whether or not they were MS-13 if they were here illegally. That's just an extra, because of the priority on public safety threats, we're emphasizing the removals of gang members, in this case, foreign terrorist organization gang members. But as to your other question, they went through all of the due process, as you would call it, that is required by law. So, but I just want to, what I find so mystifying is that I've been talking to you all for a very long time. I legitimately, in my entire, going back years actually, in my entire professional life, I've never received this many questions from the media about an American who was raped or murdered by an illegal alien. Like, legitimately never. And all of you who are enjoying your lives and doing quite well, if you had children and you were living near any of these people, you would move away immediately. You would call the police immediately. You would call us and ask us to make you and your family safer immediately. And you thank your lucky stars every night that you have enough means and enough money not to live in communities where, say, illegal alien pedophiles offend and reoffend and keep reoffending and keep reoffending. There's an expression there, but for the grace of God go I. The Biden administration apprehended 2 illegal aliens from Venezuela. They were trained to Aragua. A lot more than 2, but the story I'm telling is 2. And they decided they were entitled to an enormous amount of due process. And they didn't feel they had enough evidence to just deport them right away. So they put them on a monitoring system known as supervised release. You're familiar with this case. But a few weeks later, they kidnapped a young girl named Jocelyn Nungri, who was 12 years old at the time. I'm sure you've seen pictures of her. Just the most perfect girl you could possibly imagine. And her mother loved her very much. She was tied up, savagely beaten, stripped naked, tortured to death, murdered. Her body was dumped into a lake. So she didn't get any due process, but I'll tell you who did are the 2 illegal aliens from Venezuela who stole her forever. And there's stories like that all over the country. We just arrested a pedophile illegal alien who's being shielded by Sanctuary City, who's been charged in 20 sex crimes against children. None of you, any of you have had the chance to spend time with victims' families whose children have been raped or whose wives have been raped, murdered. But if that doesn't break your heart, nothing will. And I know that we have some people, like Taylor Lawrence, who fantasize about assassinations and things like that. But in the civilized society, the power of the state is used to keep innocent people alive and to keep innocent women and children from being hurt. This administration is never going to apologize for using the power of the state to keep men, women, and children from being savagely murdered and beaten. If we release known and suspected MS-13 and trained to Aragua, and then there's another Jocelyn Nungri, then whose responsibility is that going to be? You think that we're going to sit around wringing our hands, wondering if, maybe we should, release this person, give them a little bit of extra time, give them a little bit extra chance to plead their case, and then what? They kidnap somebody, they slit their throat, they shoot them in the head, and we say, well, at least the illegal alien got due process. They're here illegally. The only place that they deserve to go is to some country other than our country. And it's not a statistic. These are real lives. These are real families. There's whole neighborhoods in Los Angeles controlled by illegal alien Mexican street gangs. Entire neighborhoods where you have to live in fear because of individuals here illegally engaged in extortion and crime. Not to mention the fentanyl. You have cartels that have functional control over the entire northern territory in Mexico who are pumping fentanyl, lacing our drugs with this chemical. Children are ending up dead. They're going out to a weekend party. They think they're taking something safe, and they get a heart attack and they die by the thousands. So we're not going to apologize for doing something about that. And I just wish we lived in a country where the media gave to 1/10 a damn as much about Americans who were murdered and brutalized and savagely killed, beaten to death, as they did about whether illegal aliens that we all agree are illegal aliens should get 1 million days in court and 1 million trials and 1 million this and 1 million that. There's 15 million illegal aliens that violently enter the country. If every one of them got the trial that you're asking for, it would take us centuries to remove them. Centuries. We'd be talking about this in 300-400 years. Their great-great-great-grandchildren would be the ones representing them in court. That's how long it would take. Illegal aliens who come to our country have to be removed, and they have to be removed quickly, and that is an essential component of having something that we like to call a country.
Stephen, on the
one
matter,
last question.
on the
Thank
matter
you.
of visa restrictions, the president on his first day. Sorry, the president on his first day in office signed an executive order calling on his administration, the Department of Homeland Security, State Department, DNI, to come up with a list of countries that did meet the United States' vetting standards and to potentially put full or partial visa restrictions on those countries. I just want to know what is the status of that report that was due to the administration last month? Do you have a list yet of countries?
So the State Department has done the work that you're describing. Is currently going through the standard review process. I don't have an update beyond that, but I mean, you're correct in your statement that this was a product that was called for at the beginning of the administration and is being worked on, and hope to have a further update for you soon. Last question.
If I may, President Trump continues to say that one of the best arguments for sending undocumented criminals to El Salvador is cost. When it comes to this White House considering sending U.S. citizens to El Salvador because of being criminals, is that the same argument, cost?
So the El Salvadorian deportation program is for illegal aliens, but I would also say that on the cost point, what we're referring to is the fact that long-term incarceration in the United States, I don't know, probably costs like 100x what it costs to send somebody to El Salvador. So that's in other words, if an illegal alien commits a crime in this country and then has to go into our judicial and penal system, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm assuming it's probably like 100x cost. But I'll just close by saying the amount of lives that we've saved since we showed up by shutting down the border, since President Trump issued his executive orders and began deporting criminals, is already in the thousands. And by the way, we've been out looking for the 500,000 children that Biden trafficked into this country. The stories we've already uncovered of sex trafficking and labor trafficking and child abuse is beyond imagination. 500,000 minors were smuggled into this country under the last administration, and the administration not only didn't do anything to prevent it, in every way they funded it, subsidized it, facilitated it, supported it, contributed to it, that if any American citizen did these things, they'd be in jail for life. Thank you.
So that means that no U.S.
And then the White House is also looking to bring other agencies not normally tasked with immigration enforcement into its mass deportation efforts. As part of that push, the Social Security Administration added thousands of migrants authorized to work in the U.S. to a list of people who have been declared dead. So this makes them ineligible to obtain work authorization or receive government benefits. News Nation's Brooke Schaefer has the latest details on this story. Brooke, what's the logic behind this move?
Well, Marky, we should really point out here that all of the people impacted by this do have temporary legal status here in the U.S. But this new move by the Trump administration aims to really motivate people to self-deport by wiping out their ability to live and work here in the U.S. As you laid out there, the Social Security Administration recently renamed what is called its quote-unquote death master file to the ineligible master file. Now that file, once used to track people who are deceased and can no longer receive benefits, will be used on anyone that the SSA deems ineligible. Being added to that list, it makes it nearly impossible for people to use banks or other basic services that require a social security number. And now more than 6,000 immigrants who entered the country through a Biden-era parole program, but were recently flagged for criminal or security concerns, they're having their access to jobs, banks, and federal programs and benefits all revoked. The White House, they are selling this change as a common sense decision, a White House spokesperson saying in part, President Trump promised mass deportations, and by removing the monetary incentive to come and stay, we will encourage people to self-deport. The Social Security Administration, though, it says that an incorrect death report, it can cause serious financial hardship. Marky?
And Brooke, this latest Trump administration tactic is already getting some pushback. Who's speaking out against this?
Yeah, and really sort of on that same note there, the critics of this change say that stripping migrants of their Social Security numbers is really setting them up for financial murder, one person said, and that moving living people to the so-called death list violates privacy laws meant to protect people's personal data. They warn that targeting immigrants could impact the broader public. A Senate Finance Committee ranking member said that this move will victimize American citizens who've had their identities stolen or who have been neutralized. So really a big conversation here, a lot of back and forth already happening this morning. Marky?
All right, Brooke Schaefer, thank you so much for the latest there.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. Also, don't forget to click that red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
All right, well, did you hear about this? Former President Joe Biden is back. Today he will make his first public speech since leaving the White House. The former president will address disability advocates at a conference in Chicago, focusing on protecting Social Security.
The event's executive director saying the following: "We are deeply honored. President Biden is making his first public appearance at our sold-out conference. We are thrilled the president will be joining us to discuss how we can work together for a stable and successful future for Social Security." Joe Concha, a Fox News contributor and senior writer for the Washington Examiner. Joe, guess who's back? Back again. Shady's back, tell a French. Maybe not Shady, but Joe Biden's back. So what are your thoughts on this, and describe your expectations for this speech?
Reach back 25 years for that one, Todd. Well done. M&M, TMP, yes. Look, Joe Biden may be returning to the stage, but most Democrats would rather he probably stayed at the beach. I mean, he left office with one of the lowest approval ratings of any president ever. And many Democrats blame him, Joe Biden, for not announcing earlier that he would not seek a second term. And as we've seen with other Biden speeches, you know what we're going to get here. We're going to get hyperbole and fear to warn about the alleged threat of Donald Trump to democracy and so on. Hopefully there's no big red backgrounds behind him. And he's not going to offer any real alternatives or solutions. It'll just be Festivus, an airing of grievances signifying nothing. But he is eligible to run again in 2028, remember. And with this Democrat bench as thin as it is, never say never to a Joe Biden, Stephen A. Smith ticket. Who knows?
Well, I hope that doesn't happen, because then Todd's going to have to sing the Guess Who's Back song again, and we cannot have that.
That didn't work.
That's right.
Let's just be real.
So the White House Correspondents' Dinner is next Saturday, and President Trump is not going to attend. But Axios has this pretty interesting here. The White House and conservative groups have floated the idea of hosting a rival event on the same night as the dinner, potentially to celebrate First Lady Melania Trump's birthday. So yeah, I can see this happening. You know, they have their party, we're going to have ours.
I could completely see that happening, quite frankly. Melania Trump doesn't age, by the way, so the birthdays are almost irrelevant. Amazing that she has kept herself looking as perfect as she does in so many public settings and private, I would imagine. But President Trump shouldn't attend this White House Correspondents' Dinner. I went years ago when he first came into office and remember the fact that he did a rally in like a cold area of Pennsylvania, and we had this juxtaposition on the split screen that showed Trump with voters, with people that work hard every day, than a bunch of people like me in tuxedos at the Washington Hilton celebrating journalism when journalism obviously trust is at an all-time low. So remember, the White House Correspondents Association hired a comedian who literally said she hoped Donald Trump didn't come, said that Trump and members of the administration called them murderers. Then she was told she was no longer invited. So this thing has been one big mess. The dinner hasn't been relevant in many years and would therefore be a waste of the president's time to be in a room where most of the attendees either voted against him or loathe him outright. So if they want to do an alternative event, sure, have at it. But I doubt it's actually they're going to be able to pull that off and get that all planned within a week or so.
Yeah, the clock is a ticking, and that thing's a Saturday from now, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. President Trump, meantime, having a tense exchange with CNN reporter and anchor Caitlin Collins. Take a listen.
Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
Can you just also respond to that question? Because, you know, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them.
Joe, your thoughts?
Well, you see this over and over again on CNN and other networks where he is just a Maryland father, a Maryland man who is coaching his kids' Little League team like I was yesterday, and then I swept in and sent him to El Salvador. No, he entered the country illegally. That's something that CNN has a big problem saying. An illegal immigrant or an illegal or somebody who entered the country illegally. It's always just a man, a Maryland man, as if he was just a naturalized citizen. And Caitlin Collins is like a science experiment if one combined the DNA of Jim Acosta and like April Ryan. She's always making herself the story. And again, we saw members of the administration from Marco Rubio to others that were in that room, like Stephen Miller, obviously answering the question the right way while mocking the question. And even El Salvador's president said, yeah, we're not going to return this person. So it's just something that we seem to talk about every week, how Caitlin Collins asks a question that gets shut down pretty quickly, but it gets her attention, I guess. But then again, you look at her ratings in prime time, and she can't even attract 500,000 people to watch her show. That's where we're at this point. CNN is watched by less people than the Discovery Channel, Hallmark, Mystery, TLC, Food Network, History Channel. There's a reason for that. They do have everything with a slant. They are hopelessly biased, and they're not the network that I grew up watching in the 90s. That I know for sure.
Well, the president of El Salvador certainly got a firsthand look at our media landscape. That's for sure.
Now he's going to watch the
Yes,
Hallmark Channel, per Joe's instruction.
Joe, thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
Of the story this morning, Joy Wang is at the alert desk with a rundown of Abrego Garcia's background.
Well, let's start things off with reporter John Gonzalez, who's live outside federal court in Greenbelt, Maryland, where, John, there's going to be a hearing on this topic later today.
That's right, and we'll see how much pull this hearing will have with this case because, boy, those words sent shockwaves from the White House yesterday. El Salvador President Nayib Bukele saying that he will not release Kilmer Abrego Garcia, the man who was mistakenly deported to that federal prison, to that gang prison in El Salvador, even describing Abrego Garcia as a terrorist. Now, President Trump's top advisors have also stated that they have no basis for the Central American nation to return Abrego Garcia. So what happens next? Well, we know that later this afternoon, a federal judge here at the U.S. District Courthouse in Greenbelt will hold a hearing taking up the case. But there is a strong possibility that the Prince George's County the father and husband may never return. I spoke with a senior policy analyst for the immigration team at the Center for American Progress. She's afraid that without due process in cases like this, it leaves legal residents vulnerable, and many should be very concerned.
President Trump has done this with Putin, where he has swapped prisoners in exchange for others. So Trump has the power to make this call and ask for his return. There is no reason why these two presidents are saying that they can't return him when we've seen it done before.
Now, a senior immigration and customs enforcement official said in a sworn statement that Abrego Garcia, quote, is no longer eligible for withholding of removal, unquote, because of the Trump administration's claim that he was once a member of the MS-13 gang, even though no evidence of that has surfaced. Coming up later this hour, what Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland is planning to do. He says he'll even travel to El Salvador. Reporting live, John Gonzalez, 7 News.
The 7 News, we've been covering this story for weeks. Just look at all the articles we have on our homepage already. This one saying that he was mistakenly deported and that he's alive and secure. Another one talking to an immigration analyst about due process, as well as this latest story about the Salvadoran president saying that he won't be releasing him. And we're also learning more about Garcia's case. Court records state that he's been living in the United States for about 14 years. Along with it, we're also learning more about what's next. We're told it is not the first time he's accused of being a gang member. In fact, police questioned him in Maryland about it in 2019. Garcia said he wasn't and was eventually granted a withholding of removal status, preventing his deportation to El Salvador. Then on March 12th, he was stopped by ICE agents who wrongfully told him his status had changed. According to court documents, Justice Department attorneys have said he was removed to El Salvador because of an administrative error.
Well, just outside the White House yesterday, Kilmar Abrego Garcia's family and supporters, as you see here, gathered there to pray for his return. Leaders of the immigrant advocacy group CASA, they are vowing to fight on despite this setback and bringing him home back to Maryland. Garcia's case is also the topic of our online poll this morning. You can scan the QR code on your screen to weigh in. The question here is, should a president have the final say in the fate of a deported person? The majority of you, 60%, say no. We'll check in on the results again in our next half hour.
Let's get reaction now from Harrison Fields, special assistant to President Trump. He's also the White House principal deputy press secretary. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll start with the Supreme Court. Says you must facilitate Garcia's return. Is anyone in the White House actually trying to do that?
Well, let's level set a little bit. The Supreme Court also acknowledged that the district court acted outside of their bounds when it comes to the president's Article 2 authorities when it comes to immigration. And they said that essentially El Salvador has the jurisdiction now on whether or not to release this individual. El Salvador's president came out today and basically said he's not going to do so. So now this individual will stay there. But I also want to correct the record. The framing, and I'm glad you talked about Rachel Morin because she hasn't gotten any coverage from the mainstream media, and her senator, Chris Van Hollen, who's sending letters about this man and had no letters to do with Rachel Morin. But the reality is this wasn't a Maryland father. This was a El Salvadorian man who was illegally in this country, who was affiliated with MS-13.
There is no evidence to that. Let's set the record straight
about who this person is.
There's no evidence that he was a gang member.
With all due respect, if the Department of Justice has come out and said that he has gang affiliations, just like the same man who killed Rachel Morin had gang affiliations. So you would have told me before Rachel Morin's death, you would have defended that man and said he had no gang affiliations, and he went on to kill Rachel Morin. So instead of defending this gentleman, talk about who he actually is, and talk about the risk in keeping illegal criminals in this country. This is exactly what President Trump was elected to do, to return these people back to their home countries, and that's what he did.
We're not defending him. I'm going to reiterate that is unsubstantiated. There is no evidence of him being a gang member. He is married to a U.S. citizen, and he was in this country legally. Okay, but we don't know if he was
Being
actually...
married does not make you not a gang member.
There's no evidence. We're going to move on. There's no evidence that he was a gang member, and I want to reiterate that to our viewers.
The Department of Justice came out and said there was credible evidence that he was a member or affiliated with MS-13.
You said he's a gang member, and he wasn't legally allowed to be here, which, again, he was legally allowed to be here. and he is married to
You
an
can hold
American
court
citizen.
for him all you want. He's no longer in this country.
All right.
The Americans are safer because of it.
And to go back to the original question, so right now the White House seems to be doing nothing about getting him back, and that's fine. I'm going to move on.
He's an illegal immigrant. He was here illegally with deportation orders in 2019. What part of that do you not understand?
I understand the story very well, and I'm going to stop going back and forth with you on this, but I will say, again, he had every right to be in this country. Is there any scenario under which
He did
this
not.
guy...
He was an illegal immigrant.
We're going to move on this.
No, I will not let you go forward.
Okay.
He was an illegal alien in this country with a deportation order in 2019. He is an El Salvadorian citizen. If you are not a citizen of the United States of America, here illegally, there are grounds to deport you, in which happened recently.
Again, unsubstantiated. Those are not the facts, but I will move on. President Trump says he supports sending violent Americans to El Salvador. What kind of people are we talking about here? Luigi Mangione, of course, the arson suspect who attacked Governor Shapiro's home. Who are we talking about? What constitutes as a violent American citizen to be sent to a mega prison in El Salvador?
Well, he talked about examples, people that are throwing people in front of subways, that are clobbering women over the heads with hammers. Again, the president mentioned this idea. There'll be forthcoming announcements if the law, and I'll repeat, if the law dictates we can do this. But the reality is the president was elected on law and order and making America safe again. It was exactly what he's doing, which is exactly what the Attorney General Pam Bondi is doing. And listen, you can say all you want about Bukele and the way he's running his country, but the reality is he's got a 90% approval rating because El Salvadorians feel safe again in their country. Why is it that America can't conduct the same safety measures to ensure that men, women, and children are all safe in this country?
So the same
Public
safety measures as El Salvador?
Idea.
Same safety measures as El Salvador.
Protecting the streets. That's not controversial. Unless it is now in News Nation, that would be news to me.
That is not true, and you know you're distorting my words. But again, we're gonna move on. Trump is turning over federal land.
I have serious questions. You're defending this Maryland father of four.
I'm not defending him. I'm saying the facts, and I
I
haven't said anything negative about Bukele at all, or his positive rates in his country. That has never been brought up. Okay. Trump is turning over...
Do you have a problem with the way he runs criminal justice in El Salvador?
It's not my job to say whether I think he's running his country well or not. That's not my job.
But we think he's doing a great job, and the people of El Salvador think so too.
Noted from the Trump administration. Thank you for that. I am going to move on now. President Trump is turning over federal land along the border to the military. The AP reporting today that the Army will control it as part of a base there. Is the intent for troops to help detain migrants at the border as well?
We have all hands on deck at the southern border. The president was elected to secure that southern border. We cannot allow what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris allowed. We had over 20 million illegal immigrants coming to this country, many of them who have committed crime, the initial crime of crossing the border illegally. But then you've gone on to see what we've called migrant crime. Crime after crime in which you've seen Rachel Morin die, Jocelyn Nungari die, Laken Riley die. The president was elected to defend Americans, which is what he's doing when it comes to securing that border, and he has full support from the American people to do so.
So, just answering the question, is the intent for troops to help detain migrants at the border as well?
As I mentioned earlier, that all hands will be on deck at the southern border to ensure that this border is impenetrable and that we regain operational control and safety at the border, which Joe Biden gave over to the cartels, in which they had operational control over the southern border. Why any president would allow that to happen is truly unbelievable, but President Trump is making sure that we have semblance, that we have law and order and safety at our southern border. It's a matter of national security to do so, not just at our southern border, but also at the northern border.
All right, before I let you go, Mr. Fields, I want to ask you about a story that came out a few hours ago. Harvard is rejecting the White House's demands of restricting international students considered hostile, despite, of course, a threat of funding cuts. Harvard says it won't surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Just wanted to ask your response to that as well.
I don't know if it's a constitutional right to let in people who are activists who are here to demonize and destruct this country. We all saw what happened on Ivy League campuses in which Jewish students were attacked that were harassed and prevented from going to school, all in the name of protesting. These aren't Americans. You are here on a student visa. You do not come to the United States of America to cause trouble. You are here to get an education. And if you want to be an activist, to make disruptions in our country, you can do that back home, because you will not be welcome under President Trump's administration to come here and to deny Jewish students the right to get an education through the means of so-called protests. It was inexplainable why any college president would allow that to happen previously. They are now being put on record. These are violations to law. President Trump is making sure that there are no more violations to law.
Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
We begin this hour with the case of a Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. There's a court hearing happening this afternoon, just one day after the White House and El Salvador's president rejected the idea of bringing him back to the United States. Last week, the Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to facilitate his return. But yesterday in the Oval Office, both leaders said it was not going to happen. Listen.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
I want to bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro. So, Aaron, the president of the United States somehow wants to take over Greenland. He wants to impose tariffs on the U.S. economy, but he quivers in the face of the president of El Salvador. He has no power when it comes to getting El Salvador to do what he would like them to do. So how are they justifying the Trump administration keeping Abrego Garcia in that country?
Vlad, good to be with you. It is really, the crux of it is really the Trump administration's interpretation, spin of that 9-0 Supreme Court ruling that said that the U.S. should, quote, facilitate Abrego Garcia's return, but also asked the lower court judge to clarify what they're asking the executive branch to do with respect to the power of the executive branch. The Trump administration is taking that, and we've seen this in court filings leading up to yesterday, saying that the courts cannot dictate their foreign policy, what they do in regards to foreign relations. You also saw the Trump administration, despite in court filings saying that it was an oversight, that it was an error that Abrego Garcia was sent to El Salvador. You've seen White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller saying it was just a clerical mistake and that it wasn't an actual overall mistake for the administration to send him to El Salvador. In part, you're also seeing the Attorney General Pam Bondi really put the onus on the president of El Salvador to make a decision on Abrego Garcia. And as you just mentioned, the president, Bukele, showed no indication of doing that.
The other news that the president made yesterday, Aaron, as you know, is he floated the idea of sending U.S. citizens to prison in El Salvador. What did he say? What is the legal basis for such an act? And what are members of Congress, if any, saying about it?
Yeah, there's no real legal precedent for this. In part, that's why you saw President Trump yesterday ask his Attorney General Pam Bondi to, quote, look into it. What President Trump referred to both in the Oval Office and in an interview with Fox Noticias that we saw a clip of today, he's talking about, quote, homegrown criminals, those who commit crimes, who are U.S. citizens, sending them to, deporting them outside of the country. And in a hot mic moment, you heard him tell President Bukele that he has to build, quote, 5 more places to potentially house these U.S. citizens. Again, no legal precedent for this, but we'll see what the Attorney General, per President Trump's request, puts out as she looks into it.
All right, Aaron, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Meanwhile, a federal judge also blocked President Trump's plan to revoke the legal status of hundreds of thousands of migrants who came to the U.S. legally under the Biden administration. The judge argued deporting people without a case-by-case justification, quote, undermines the rule of law. For more on that ruling, let's bring in CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman. Good to see you, Katrina. So people were facing an April 24th deadline to self-deport. Break down what this means from a legal perspective.
Good morning, Vlad. What this means is there is a temporary reprieve for these individuals who came into the United States under a Biden-era program. It's a temporary stay, but it means for now they will not have to self-deport out of the country. They could be assessed on an individualized case-by-case basis, but by no means is this case done. We are absolutely going to see an appeal from the Trump administration. But what's significant is that for now, these people who came in and were allowed to stay in the U.S. on parole for 2 years do not have to leave the country.
So let's go back to that case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, which goes before a judge later today. Help me understand what the White House is asking the judge to clarify, and ultimately what power, if any, the courts have in getting this man back. And Katrina, looking ahead, speculating here, but what would happen if it lands back in the Supreme Court?
Vlad, I mean, I'm expecting this hearing today to be highly contentious. The judge had very specifically said that the government has to take steps to bring back Mr. Abrego Garcia to the country. We are seeing that completely flouted in that meeting yesterday with President Trump and President Bukele. They both made it clear that they are not planning to take any steps in that direction. And we're seeing very different interpretations of the Supreme Court's ruling. The judge in the district court clearly sees the word facilitate. The Supreme Court said that the government has to facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia as them actually having to take steps to return him. The Trump administration has perceived it a completely different way. So, if this reaches the Supreme Court again, maybe we could get some clarification on that matter. But I think what we're seeing is a potential tipping point here. This could be a case where we're reaching a level where the judge may decide that she needs to hold someone in contempt. That's something that we haven't yet seen in any of these cases. We've seen them nearing that point, but we will potentially see a contempt proceeding proceed here, Vlad.
So how has the legal community been reacting to this?
I mean, the legal community is very concerned. One of my sources has described it as though they're watching the Trump administration see how far they can get with, touching an electrical fence. How far can they overreach without a complete pushback from the judicial branch here? As I said, we haven't yet seen anyone held responsible in any of these cases. We haven't reached that level of contempt, but there is deep concern here. We are seeing actions taken that many legal scholars say potentially violate the Constitution. We have so many of these cases, Vlad. There's the case of the pro-Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil, where a lot of legal scholars say he is being detained simply on the basis of his free speech. His First Amendment right to free speech is being violated. Yesterday, you and Aaron were just talking about, we heard very concerning talk. President Trump saying that he wants to consider deporting U.S. criminals to El Salvador. Legal scholars say there is no legal basis for this. You can jail someone for their criminal actions, but there's no precedent for deporting them. And in fact, that could be in violation of the Eighth Amendment. It could be considered cruel and unusual punishment. So we are really seeing the Trump administration testing the limits of the judiciary and seeing how far they can push back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just struggling to understand. The only way that it would work is if they do what they have been doing, Katrina, which is grab people off the streets and deport them before anybody knows what's happening. If they go before any judge in the country and try to deport a U.S. citizen to a foreign jail, no judge, no matter their political persuasion, would allow that, right?
I mean, you wouldn't think so, Vlad. I mean, one thing about this case with Mr. Abrego Garcia is that, it's much bigger than him, because if they bring him back, there could be more actions to bring back the other people that they have deported to El Salvador. And the Trump administration clearly doesn't want to set that precedent.
All right, Katrina Kaufman breaking it down for us. Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you, Vlad.
We've got a lot going on here. I want to start with this, though, Danny. Complicating matters is that Abrego Garcia, the mistaken, and I use that word lightly, I put that in quotes because aren't they all these deportations that have happened to this El Salvador prison legally questionable? But in terms of this mistaken deportation, it's not clear how the U.S. Supreme Court would have jurisdiction. Points made by Secretary of State Marco Rubio yesterday. Take a look.
I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin, except for Venezuela that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President, no, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
So, you know, there's been a lot of criticism of the Supreme Court, the way they phrased their decision, and you predicted how everything would go down on Friday. And at the same time, this is difficult, isn't it? And the Supreme Court may have done all they can do. You have an El Salvador resident return to El Salvador, and a judge in Washington, D.C., telling El Salvador to send back one of their own residents to the United States. It's more complicated than it looks, which Marco Rubio is pointing out that, look, what's the deal, guys? Politically, we'll get to the politics of this. This is a winner for the Trump administration, in my opinion. And then on top of it, distracting from all the other questionable deportations. Can you comment on the Secretary of State's explanation of this?
The Secretary of State's explanation, like much of the Trump administration's position, all was predictable. And as you mentioned, I was here on Friday and I read the Supreme Court's order, and anyone reading it could have seen this coming. I would love to be some talented fortune teller. Right. I'm not. If you just read the language of the Supreme Court order, that order said, and I'm quoting from it, that any directive the lower court came up with would have to give due regard to the executive branch's exclusive authorities over foreign affairs. The Supreme Court essentially said to the lower court, go back, tell the administration how to facilitate this return if you dare, or if you can find a way to make the administration do it. The administration knew that from reading the language. They could just sit back and say, hey, we've done everything we can. And their position is, we view the word facilitate as removing all domestic obstacles. So if he happened to make it back here to Cleveland, we would have no problem taking him. But now that he's in El Salvador, there is nothing we can do because, as Rubio said, this is infringing on the area, the exclusive executive area of foreign affairs. And just one little footnote here, too. There's been much reporting, and correctly, that the government admitted this was a mistake. But keep in mind, that will not be the administration's party line, because the attorney for the government who said that, the administration has essentially disavowed this person. They put him on administrative leave. For not zealously representing the government. Pam Bondi's words, not mine. So while it's true the government admitted that Garcia was removed improperly due to an administrative error, don't expect the administration to carry on with that position. They've already distanced themselves from it. They don't believe they're disregarding a court order. They believe they're acting consistent with it.
Absolutely. And Dave Arenberg, you had the president with the president of El Salvador right there going, nope, I'm not going to send him back. And the president's job, you tell me, in terms of trying to follow the U.S. Supreme Court ruling, President Trump's job is done, because he sat right next to the president of El Salvador and said, I'm not sending him back. Therefore, any attempt to facilitate his return ends with the president of El Salvador, does it not?
Well, that's what they're trying to say, Mika, but it's obvious that President Bukele would have this individual on the next flight home in first class if Trump demanded it. Judge Zinnes was right, the district court judge. You don't rid yourself of constitutional responsibilities of due process by outsourcing your detention. And we're actually paying El Salvador to lock these folks up. And Kristi Noem, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, said this is a tool in our toolkit. So if it is one of our tools, we can fix the problem. I don't think we're in a constitutional crisis yet, though, Mika, because the administration is playing games with the interpretation of federal court rulings, but they're not outwardly defying federal judges. No one's been held in contempt yet. Trump has said he will respect the decisions of the Supreme Court. So instead of refusing to comply, what they're doing is trying to twist the Supreme Court's words to make it a victory for themselves when it really wasn't. But as Danny correctly said, the Supreme Court is partly to blame here. They could have ordered Abrego Garcia's return, but they did not. They softened Judge Zinnes' language. They took out the word effectuate, and they said, let's facilitate the return. And this is because Chief Justice Roberts wanted unanimity. He wanted Clarence Thomas and Alito and the other conservatives to join with the progressive in a 9-0 ruling. He got it. But in so doing, he has made things worse.
And the word facilitate is so important there, as both of our legal experts have pointed out. But it is stunning, Chris, when you see in the Oval Office, you've got the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, using that word facilitate in front of the president of El Salvador, saying it's up to them if they want to send them back. She even says, we'll send a plane and facilitate it. And then you've got the president of El Salvador saying, what am I going to do? Smuggle him back into the United States? They're talking past each other, and it seems purposeful. Mika alluded to the political realities here. What are they, as you see?
Why didn't the press who were present ask the president, why don't you ask them to send them back?
They asked the questions about the way they were talking about
asking the president of El Salvador to send him back, and then there would be no question about smuggling him back into the country. That whole language was, as you said, we're talking past each other. You know, this whole thing, Mika, I think this whole discussion of the border has changed so dramatically from the election. The New York Times reported the two reasons Trump won. The two reasons was he talked about inflation and he talked about the border. We haven't talked about the border being closed since he got in office. The country is reasonable. They want the border closed. They want to stop people coming into the country illegally. They want people coming in with permission from the United States government to come in the country. But also they seem to want to get people who've actually broke the laws in this country. Two laws. Break the law coming in and then break the law here in terms of criminality here. In this case, the issue has come down to something that's right on the border. People don't want somebody punished who isn't committing a crime, who's not in a gang, who's not a dangerous gang. And so I think the country's still at a reasonable position. Close the border, go after criminals, but don't go after people who are innocent.
I hope you're right, Chris. I'm not sure. Molly.
Well, we're not complaining about the border. Nobody's complaining. I haven't heard a pipsqueak from anybody in any of the organized groups to say we shouldn't have closed the border. The public wanted the border closed.
I just want to point out this Quinnipiac poll that was released last night, which shows that now the majority of Americans now disapprove of Trump on the deportations, 53 to 42.
Okay.
So I think that is a big deal.
Okay.
Well, because they think he's administratively wrong, because they think they're taking people who are not criminals out of the country.
I've just been so disappointed.
But this is a real case of squandering, right? There was some agreement with Trump, but not for this. And I think that's a really important point here, right? Yeah. That there was, and we saw this even in the polls leading up to the election, right? They were they were okay with some of this, but not this kind of radical behavior, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I
agree.
I hope that Americans see the value in caring about this and these videos that they made of these hundreds of men who were chained and sent out of this country and put into a notorious mega prison in El Salvador. I hope that they can connect with it. I just... we will see, and maybe those numbers bear that out. From politics back to the law. Danny, where does this go next?
I think this road could be leading to contempt. And what I also think, and I don't know that any federal judge will be candid about it, but I think there are a lot of federal judges who don't want this to go down the road of contempt, because that raises a really thorny issue of who do you hold in contempt in the chain of command? Because every human being in the administration's chain of command can say, I was ordered to do it, except one person. And that person is at the top of the chain of command. So if you're a judge, whether it's a Supreme Court or a district court judge, and you find that someone has acted in contempt in this administration and their reading of the order is wrong, who do you punish? That may be the next tricky constitutional issue.
The fallout from that bombshell Oval Office meeting yesterday set to play out before a judge today. Both sides are due back in court in a follow-up hearing for the man mistakenly deported to El Salvador. And here is where things stand right now. A U.S. district judge ordered the government to facilitate Kilmar Abrego Garcia's return to the United States. The U.S. Supreme Court unanimously upheld that ruling, but listen to what leaders had to say yesterday during an Oval Office meeting with the president of El Salvador when asked if they would bring Abrego Garcia back home.
The ruling solely stated
that if this individual at El Salvador's sole discretion was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a second time. No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it, per the court, can only be directed to him.
The question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So in 2019, a judge ruled Abrego Garcia could stay in the U.S. due to fear that going back to El Salvador could put his life in danger. His wife responded to yesterday's meeting, saying the Trump and Bukele administrations continue to play political games with her husband's life. And now, in a new push to secure his return, Democratic lawmakers are speaking out, calling for a meeting with President Nayib Bukele. They say not returning him would be equivalent to kidnapping. Listen.
Of course, President Trump could have just said, bring him home. Of course he could have done that. But this is an administration that has lied about Mr. Abrego Garcia, right? The vice president of the United States tweeted out that he had a criminal record. That was a lie. They're just lying. They've gotten caught lying. They don't want to admit it. And they have an obligation to bring him home. But I will say the president of El Salvador should not now take it upon himself to say that he is detaining him for one more day, because that is kidnapping. I understand that the attorney general said that we would provide a plane to bring him home. So all the president of El Salvador has to do now is hand over and release an innocent man and let him come home to his family.
Let's bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, based on what we heard yesterday at the White House, what's the Trump administration's plan for court today?
Their plan will likely be to try to say as little as possible. This U.S. District Judge has required of them that they provide regular updates on what they are doing to bring Mr. Abrego Garcia back to the U.S. And in their filings, they provide as little information as possible. First of all, because they aren't doing anything, by the White House's own admission, to try to bring him home. And second of all, because they believe that foreign policy is solely the purview of the President of the United States. And so yesterday, for example, Mugo, in a filing with the judge where they were required to report what the latest is on his status, they simply said, well, the president of El Salvador, and you played the sound just a few moments ago, says he's not sending him back. Period. And so I anticipate that they will be not very forthcoming today either, although the district judge has been getting more and more frustrated, and it's possible today that she could impose some sort of deadline on the administration by which time she wants to see this man back in U.S. custody.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens there. I also want to ask you about this because there's also, during that same meeting yesterday, the president says there is a possibility of sending American citizens who commit a violent crime to El Salvador. Listen to this, and then we'll get your take on the other side.
Could we use it for violent criminals, our own violent criminals?
I call them homegrown criminals.
Yes.
I mean, the
homegrowns.
The ones that grew up and something went wrong and they hit people over the head with a baseball bat. We have, and push people into subways just before the train gets there, like you see happening sometimes. We are looking into it and we want to do it. I would love to do that.
So he calls them again, quote, homegrown criminals. I have to ask here, is this something that can be done? Is this even constitutional?
Legal experts say no, that not only would it be unprecedented, but possibly unconstitutional, a violation of the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, which says that U.S. citizens cannot be subjected to cruel and unusual punishments. Even violent criminals are afforded certain rights here in the United States when they are imprisoned, rights that they might not have access to if they were imprisoned overseas. Nevertheless, President Trump made it clear in the Oval Office yesterday that he is actively exploring this possibility, that he has tasked his attorney general with looking into the legality of it. And he said flat out to the president of El Salvador, who was there in the room with him, that he'd like him to open up more prisons so that President Trump can start sending these U.S. citizens or homegrown criminals, as he put it, to El Salvador.
And Nancy, there is a major manufacturing development from NVIDIA to start producing AI supercomputers entirely here in the United States. The president reacted to that on social media, saying, quote, all necessary permits will be expedited and quickly delivered to NVIDIA, as they will to all companies committing to be part of the golden age of America. So what do we know about this, Nancy?
Well, the White House says this is the Trump effect at work, that NVIDIA is one of several companies moving some production to the United States in response to these new Trump tariffs, which could potentially make it more expensive to produce overseas. NVIDIA was asked point blank about this and whether this factory that they're planning to build in Texas is something that they were going to do, or if they're doing it in response to the Trump tariffs. And they said no comment. But we do know that the head of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, has been meeting with the president and eager to build a relationship, and obviously semiconductors and computer chips, something that is very badly needed here in the United States. There are challenges with the supply chain when they are built overseas, and the U.S. is an enormous market. So whether or not this was directly influenced by Trump policies, the Trump administration is calling it a win.
Of course, of course. And finally, Nancy, we have to talk about this standoff between the administration and Harvard and the move to freeze more than $2 billion in funding. That is a lot of money. What's the message from each side about this?
Well, the message from Harvard is that they are not willing to make some of the changes that the Trump administration demanded of them in order to keep their federal funding. The administration was demanding that they change some of their hiring and admissions practices in order to provide more ideological diversity. And the Harvard administration said, we are not going to let anybody tell us how to run our university or how to achieve academic freedom. So they basically said, we're not going to meet those demands. And in return, the administration froze a whopping $2.2 billion worth of grants for research conducted at Harvard University. And then just a short time ago, the president went even further online, as we suspected he would, saying that perhaps Harvard's tax-exempt status should be pulled as well. That is a major threat, because Harvard, like most educational institutions, is tax exempt. That again would be this White House straying into an area that has always been off limits to the political branch of this government, basically using the IRS to take retribution on an organization whose practices they don't like. So we'll see if President Trump actually tries to make good on this threat, or if he's just blowing off some steam.
Yeah, we shall see how all of this plays out. Nancy Cordes, thank you so much for joining us on 24/7 today. Okay, let's bring in CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez. Camilo, thanks for joining us today. I want to ask you about Kilmar Abrego Garcia's wife. What else did she have to say after that bombshell development from yesterday's meeting?
Good morning, Muga. Well, we spoke to Jennifer Abrego Garcia's wife, who was a U.S. citizen, about 2 weeks ago, and she was still grappling with her husband's deportation to El Salvador and the fact that he was imprisoned at that mega prison known as Secot, which is infamous in that country. And she told us that that deportation had a severe and adverse impact on her, but also on their 5-year-old son, who was born with disabilities and who also happens to be a U.S. citizen. And she put out a new statement after that meeting between Presidents Bukele and Trump. And she said in part, Mugo, as we start Holy Week, a time meant for celebration and unity, my heart aches for my husband. who should be sitting at our Easter table, leading us in prayer as he has for so many years. Instead, I find myself still praying for his safety, and return home. So clearly, while this case is playing out in federal courts, but also in the court of public opinion, there is a human element here and a human dilemma for this family.
Yeah, it's always important to remember that we're talking about people here and their family members as well. Both Bukele and the Trump administration seem to be standing firm on this and not bringing him back. So what do we expect to come out of this follow-up hearing that is happening today?
Well, Mugo, a federal district court judge in federal district court in Maryland will oversee this case yet again and will try to assess and evaluate whether the Trump administration is following her court ruling to facilitate, quote unquote, the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia. The administration, Mugo, seems to be taking the position that the word facilitate only means facilitating the entry of Mr. Abrego Garcia if the Salvadoran government agrees to release him from Secot and to bring him to the U.S. But they are saying now that El Salvador, as we heard during that White House meeting, is not inclined to release this man from their custody. And so the U.S. at this point, they argue, is powerless and cannot ensure that this man can be safely returned to the U.S. We'll see what the judge says about that argument, but she is giving the administration daily requirements to provide status updates as to Mr. Abrego Garcia's whereabouts and also the steps that the administration is taken to release him from that prison and to bring him to the U.S.
Right, and I know you'll keep us updated on what happens today. Camila, while we have you here, I want to ask you about a Biden-era immigration policy that just got a win yesterday. Which program is this, and what did the judge have to say?
Sure. So the Biden administration created this program known as CHNV that ultimately allowed more than 500,000 people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to fly to the U.S. if American-based individuals sponsor them financially. And they were allowed to work here and live here legally under an immigration benefit known as parole for at least 2 years. The Trump administration terminated that program, Mugo, and actually gave those hundreds of thousands of migrants until April 24 next week to either self-deport from the country or face arrest and deportation by ICE agents and officers. But now a federal court in Massachusetts has blocked that plan, has recalled the warnings about deporting these individuals, and has barred the administration from revoking their legal status and their work permits. So this case will continue to be litigated in the federal courts, but for now, these migrants can stay in the U.S. legally for the time being.
Okay, CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to get some more right now on our top story, the legal saga over the fate of a Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador. The White House doubling down right now on its refusal to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back to the United States, despite a U.S. Supreme Court order to, quote, facilitate his return to the U.S. while also not infringing on the president's ability to conduct foreign affairs. Let's get some serious analysis right now from the former U.S. District Court Judge Shira Scheindlin. Judge Scheindlin, thanks so much for joining us. Here's what President Trump said about this case on Friday. Listen to this.
If the Supreme Court said bring somebody back, I would do that. I respect the Supreme Court.
President Trump is now saying something very, very different. Is he defying a court order?
Well, he certainly isn't facilitating the return of Abrego Garcia, and that's what the court order requires him to do. I can't find any act he's taken that facilitates that return. I hear narrow construction that facilitate means, oh, I'll send an airplane if they want to let him go, and they, El Salvador, doesn't seem to want to let him go. But I think that's disingenuous at best. The president of the United States has a lot of power. El Salvador is a little country. The president could say to the president of El Salvador, I want this guy back. And that would be the end of it. Then he'd be on a plane and then he'd be returned. So I think the judge today is going to be very stern and is going to say to the lawyers for the government, what have you done to facilitate the return? and they're not going to have an answer. They're going to say, we can't get into foreign policy. That's foreign policy. And I don't believe that for a moment.
Right, that they're seizing on what was also in the Supreme Court opinion about the president having the ability to conduct foreign affairs and how the district court judge should really factor that in the decision. But the bottom line here, right, is that the White House says Abrego Garcia is under the control of El Salvador. The Salvadoran president says he has no power to release him. So who determines this man's fate?
Oh, I don't think the El Salvador president doesn't think he has the power to do it. The El Salvador president said, I won't send this terrorist back. I think he does have the power, but I think he's made the decision that the man is a member of MS-13 or of the I can't say it right, but the other terrorist group.
Right.
Thank you. But the fact is there's no proof at all. There's no evidence at all that he's a member of either. So that seems to be just another excuse. The U.S. has admitted, has said, we made an error in sending this man out because there had been an order called withholding of removal, which means he can be removed. But he was. So we've admitted an error. We're not telling El Salvador to do it, and we should be. And of course, the El Salvador president has the power to do it if he wants to. But I think he thinks he's working with President Trump to not return this man. So yes, I see it as defiance, and I think the judge will see it as defiance. Then the question is, what can the judge do about it? Is she going to consider contempt proceedings? If she does, and if she holds the government in contempt, that brings it back to the Supreme Court, because there would be an appeal to the Fourth Circuit, then there would be the Supreme Court, and we'd hear from them again as to what's going to happen here.
As you know, Judge Sheindlin, the Trump administration is claiming that the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling only meant they had to remove, quote, domestic obstacles, not that they had to work with the government of El Salvador to try to bring Abrego Garcia home. They seem to be taking advantage of the court's vague language about, quote, facilitating his return. Do you think that argument will hold up?
I don't. I think they're trying to spin it favorable to the government. Each side here has claimed a victory, which is kind of interesting, but a 9-0 decision that brought every member of the court together, to me, is very clear. It means he didn't get due process, he has to be returned, and you have to facilitate that return. So I do think that the judge, as I said, will have very little patience for the government's position and will consider, what can she do about it? What can the court do? Is she really without power?
Right, that's a big question. Before we let you go, Judge, I want to get your thoughts on President Trump freezing more than $2 billion in funding to Harvard. And just moments ago, in a post on Truth Social, Trump now says the university should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity. Is this constitutional?
No, it's not. And what Harvard has to do is what the law firms have done that are resisting Trump's orders. It will have to become the plaintiff in court. It will have to go to court and ask for an injunction and try to stop this order and take it through the court system, because it is not constitutional to lose its tax-exempt status. Yes, federal funds can be withheld by federal employees, that's for sure. So sooner or later that can be done. But it is inappropriate to talk about taking away its tax-exempt status. I don't see that. But Harvard has taken a position that I think it had to take, because its faculty very much, 800 faculty members, I'm told, urge the university to stand up and fight this clearly unconstitutional order, as are the unconstitutional orders directed to the law firms.
Judge Shira Sheindlin, thank you so much for joining us.
The president taking this even further, saying that he's asked Pam Bondi to now study the law, potentially sending, he would say, violent U.S. citizens, deporting them out of the country to El Salvador. Legal grounds for that are what?
Non-existent, Kate. I mean, I think it's worth reminding folks, one of the complaints that we had in the Declaration of Independence at the beginning of the American Revolution was that King George was sending criminals to faraway prisons. It's almost like history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. There's no legal authority to send a U.S. citizen to serve a U.S. criminal sentence in a foreign prison. And, Kate, it would be pretty striking if there was, because that would mean any of us could be effectively disappeared into a prison with no U.S. legal constraints, with no potential human rights limits, no matter what. And that's a pretty scary proposition just arising out of this one immigration case.
Which is why getting your take is important, and also the fact that the president says he's asking the attorney general to then study the law when there is no legal grounds for it is noteworthy. Let's take it back then. I remember hearing you describe the Supreme Court's decision with regard to the Abrego case as maddeningly vague. Is that then what's happened now, the necessary result of that vagueness? I mean, is the Trump administration continuing to ignore a judge or a justice's ruling just exactly what they were going to do, given how vague it was?
100%. I mean, Kate, I think a lot of us, at CNN and elsewhere, were saying Thursday night when the Supreme Court handed down its ruling that by switching from what Judge Zenas had done, which was say you must return him by a date and time certain, to this, wishy-washy word facilitate, the court had created exactly this wiggle room. And, Kate, maybe the Supreme Court was hoping that the Trump administration would take the hint that that decision was unanimous and would actually try to exert some pressure, diplomatic pressure, financial pressure on El Salvador to comply. I think we now know, even if we didn't last Thursday, that that's not going to happen. And so to the question of, so what's the next step in court? I don't doubt for a second is going to order the government to take more aggressive steps to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return, to put diplomatic pressure, to put economic pressure on El Salvador. If the Trump administration says, we tried and we can't, one, Kate, that's a pretty stunning concession of impotence on the part of this administration. But two, I think the other piece of this is that's going to create a lot of pressure on federal courts in every other immigration case to not let anybody be removed from the country until we're absolutely sure that all the I's have been dotted and all the T's have been crossed.
Now I want to play for you how President Trump's aide, Stephen Miller, is trying to interpret the Supreme Court's decision, how he believes it leaves them with no obligation to do anything further. Let me play this from yesterday.
Yes, it was a 9-0
in
our favor against the district court ruling, saying that no district court has the power to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. As Pam said, the ruling solely stated that if this individual, at El Salvador's sole discretion, was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a second time. No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador.
Just want to get your take on his interpretation here.
Kate, it's not a very long decision from the Supreme Court. It's about 2.5 pages. It doesn't say anything like what Stephen Miller said it says. Folks can read it for themselves and see that. I think it's quite telling that Stephen Miller has to try to spin the decision as saying literally the opposite of what it said in order to justify what the Trump administration is doing. But, Kate, if we step back for a second, there's a larger point here, which is no court has ever actually determined that Mr. Abrego Garcia is a member of MS-13, as the Trump administration claims, that he was properly removable. And so we're at the point, Kate, where if this is an argument that anyone finds persuasive, that means they can do it to us too. They can say, I'm a member of MS-13. They can say, Joe Citizen is a member of MS-13, and use that as this justification for removing them, disappearing them right into the Salvadoran prison. If that's a world in which the courts are going to be powerless, Kate, again, I think the key is courts are not going to take that lightly. And I think the result will instead be courts imposing far more onerous restrictions on the government's ability to remove folks from the country in the first place, ironically thwarting, the whole sort of justification for this policy in the first place.
The White House Faith Office has put together an extraordinary week-long celebration currently underway for Holy Week ahead of Easter Sunday. The president signed a Holy Week proclamation, filmed a special presidential video message, and will be hosting a pre-Easter dinner tomorrow night and a White House staff Easter worship service on Thursday. The president and the First Lady are honored to continue the tradition of the White House Easter egg roll, which will take place on the South Lawn next Monday. In other news, President Trump is turning America into a manufacturing superpower again. Yesterday, there was a monumental announcement by NVIDIA, one of the largest companies in the world. This is just the latest example. For the first time ever, chip-making giant NVIDIA will produce AI supercomputers entirely in the United States as part of its pledge to produce $50 billion worth of AI infrastructure in our country over the next 4 years. With their manufacturing partners, they have commissioned more than 1 million square feet of manufacturing space to build and test NVIDIA Blackwell chips in the great state of Arizona and AI supercomputers in the great state of Texas. NVIDIA's founder and CEO Jensen Huang touted how the engines of the world's AI infrastructure are being built in the United States for the first time. This is the Trump effect. This follows trillions in other U.S. investments announced already, including $500 billion from Apple in U.S.-based manufacturing and training, $100 billion from TSMC and U.S.-based chips manufacturing, and the $500 billion private investment led by OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank in artificial intelligence infrastructure. Under President Trump, we're going to produce the cars, the ships, the chips, the airplanes, minerals, and medicines that we need right here in America at the hands of American workers. On the border, President Trump continues to break records and protect our homeland. According to CBP, Border Patrol apprehensions along the southwest border for the entire month of March 2025 were lower than the first 2 days of March 2024 under Joe Biden. Incredible law enforcement officers are arresting violent illegal aliens from American communities every day. Here are a few examples from the latest ICE report, which I received this morning. ICE Los Angeles arrested a 54-year-old citizen of Mexico convicted of rape by threat, sodomy with a person under 14 years, and kidnapping in San Jose, California. ICE Houston has arrested a 23-year-old citizen of Mexico convicted of predatory criminal sexual assault of a child in Cook County, Illinois. ICE Houston arrested a 64-year-old citizen of Honduras convicted of murder in Los Angeles County, California. ICE Chicago arrested a 49-year-old citizen of Guatemala convicted of assault and arson in Prince Williams, Virginia, not far from here. ICE Denver arrested a 36-year-old citizen of Mexico who is registered as a sex offender and has been convicted of sexual assault of a child in Lake County, Colorado. ICE Baltimore arrested a 50-year-old citizen of China convicted of sex trafficking in Bel Air, Maryland. And ICE Boston arrested a 46-year-old citizen of Jamaica convicted of 3 counts of rape of a child and 2 counts of indecent assault and battery of a child under 14 in Boston, Massachusetts. President Trump and our administration will not rest until every single violent illegal alien is removed from our country. The safety of the American people is too important to settle for anything less. On that note, the Democrat and media outrage over the deportation of Abrego Garcia, an MS-13 El Salvadorian illegal alien criminal who is hiding in Maryland, has been nothing short of despicable. Based on the sensationalism of many of the people in this room, you would think we deported a candidate for Father of the Year. That's because, unfortunately, many in this country care more about this quote-unquote Maryland father, a legal alien MS-13 gang member, than a Maryland mother and an American citizen who was brutally murdered at the hands of a different illegal alien. Of course, I am referring to Rachel Morin. And if you didn't see yesterday, a Maryland jury found illegal alien Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez guilty of murdering Rachel Morin in August of 2023. She was a 37-year-old mother of 5 who was jogging in an otherwise safe community northeast of Baltimore when this monster ambushed, strangled, and beat her to death before stuffing her brutalized body in a tunnel drain. The Morin family finally got justice yesterday, but they will never get Rachel back. Our hearts go out to Rachel's family, her 5 children, and her mother, Patty, who has suffered the unimaginable loss of her daughter. In case you missed it last week, President Trump signed a national security presidential memorandum directing federal agencies administering federal land on the border to make land available to the Defense Department in a new national defense area. This followed the president's Day 1 executive order committing his administration to marshal all available resources and authorities to stop the unprecedented flood of illegal aliens into our country and to obtain complete operational control of the borders of the United States of America. Once again, the president is fulfilling another key promise. This new national defense area spans more than 170 miles across our border in New Mexico. But in the coming weeks, this administration will add more than 90 miles in the state of Texas. This national defense area will enhance our ability to detect, interdict, and prosecute the illegal aliens, criminal gangs, and terrorists who were able to invade our country without consequence for the past 4 years under the Biden administration. It will also bolster our defenses against fentanyl and other dangerous narcotics that have been poisoning our communities. With all of this work being done to make America great again, we continue to see a positive response from the American public. A brand new poll published from the Daily Mail and JL Partners this morning found that President Trump's approval rating is at an all-time high. That's because the president is working tirelessly to keep his promises to the American people, as I just saw him doing today in the Oval Office. We have a reporter in our new media seat today, Matthew Foldy. I like your boots, Matt, who is the editor-in-chief of the Washington Reporter. Washington Reporter is a new, fast-growing outlet that breaks stories about legislation and interviews leaders in Congress and across the administration. The publication's readership includes the highest levels of business and government. And with that, please kick us off, Matt.
And we've interviewed you as well. So, Caroline, thanks so much for having me here on behalf of our readership and the billions of Americans who I think appreciate what you're doing with the new media seat here and making this a more accessible briefing room. I'm curious with Harvard. We saw the Trump administration today announced it's cutting around $2 billion, or freezing $2 billion in funds to Harvard because the campus has serious problems with violence and with anti-Semitism. We saw President Obama, former President Obama, side with Harvard, which rejected the Trump administration's demands. I'm curious, where does the administration see this going with Harvard and with other colleges and universities in America that are refusing to reform in wake of the sort of craziness that we've seen take over some of them?
Thank you, Matt, for being here, and thanks for the question. When it comes to Harvard, the president's position on this is grounded in common sense, in the basic principle that Jewish American students, or students of any faith, should not be illegally harassed and targeted on our nation's college campuses. And we unfortunately saw that illegal discrimination take place on the campus of Harvard. There are countless examples to prove it, particularly with the stunning confession by then Harvard President Claudine Gay, who said that bullying and harassment depended on the context. The president at that time made it clear to the American public he was not going to tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism taking place in violations of federal law. So the president made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding. Unfortunately, Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously. All the president is asking, don't break federal law, and then you can have your federal funding. I think the president is also begging a good question. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
And I'm curious, you had just mentioned Rachel Warren, and I'm a Maryland man, and I think most Marylanders appreciate what you were saying today. We've seen that Chris Van Hollen, who was Rachel Warren's senator, basically threatening to fly to El Salvador to press for the release of someone who was in America illegally. And not as much sort of from him about Rachel Warren's horrific murder and the verdict that was, I think, rightly reached yesterday. What does the administration think about the priorities we're seeing from Senate Democrats in terms of illegal immigrants instead of the work that agencies like ICE and DHS are doing with the Trump administration?
It's mind-boggling, the priorities of the modern-day Democrat Party. I think it's atrocious that you have Democrats in Congress on Capitol Hill who swear an oath to protect their constituents and to serve them in Washington, D.C., spending more time defending illegal immigrant gang members than their own constituents and law-abiding American citizens like Rachel Warren. And I saw the president personally on the campaign trail, and I continue to see him in his role as president of the United States, put American families first, reach out to the victims, the families of victims at the hands of illegal immigrant crime. And frankly, the actions and the words of the Democrat Party prove they could not care less about the American public. And maybe if they did, they'd see a bit higher approval ratings right now. Thanks for being here with us today. Peter.
Thank you, Caroline.
To follow up on something that you just said, why do Ivy League schools get so much federal funding?
It's a very good question. And it's a question the president has obviously raised in his discussions and negotiations with not just Harvard, but also Columbia and many other Ivy League institutions. We have the Anti-Semitism Task Force, which the president promised and delivered on. The Anti-Semitism Task Forces across the government, representatives from various federal agencies who meet on a weekly basis to discuss the question that you just raised. And I think a lot of Americans are wondering why their tax dollars are going to these universities when they are not only indoctrinating our nation's students, but also allowing such egregious illegal behavior to occur.
To follow up on immigration, deporting American citizens to Central American prisons, is it legal, or do you need to change the law to do it?
It's another question that the president has raised. It's a legal question that the president is looking into. And he talked about this yesterday when with his meeting with President Bukele in the Oval Office. He would only consider this, if legal, for Americans who are the most violent, egregious, repeat offenders of crime, who nobody in this room wants living in their communities.
And then there's this CHNV thing. President Biden let more than 530,000 people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela into the U.S. with this CHNV program. He did it with the stroke of a pen. And now a judge will not let President Trump undo it with the stroke of a pen. So are you guys going to give all 530,000 plus people individual deportation hearings, or are you just going to try to deport them?
I spoke to White House counsel's office about this morning, because obviously another rogue district court judge is trying to block the administration's mass deportation efforts with this latest injunction. We will fight this in the court of law, and we will ensure that every individual who illegally entered our country and was really taken advantage of by the previous administration because they abused the parole system in this country to fast track legal status, as they said, for these illegal immigrants, and they completely abused our legal system. Many of these paroled individuals were then given temporary protective status, which the intention of that TPS was only supposed to be used in times of war or storm or destruction in the home countries of these migrants. It was completely abused. These migrants came here for economic reasons, and they illegally entered our country, and the president is not going to tolerate that. And so we will continue to focus on deporting as many individuals as we can. Jennifer.
One on tariffs and one on Russia. Can you give us any sort of an update on which deals are in hand or are close? Which countries are reaching a deal on tariffs? And then on Russia, can you give us an update on what the agreement was with Russia? The president yesterday said that he thinks we'll be seeing some very good deals very soon. Can you talk a little bit about what Russia agreed to?
Sure. Don't want to get ahead of our United States Trade Ambassador and Secretary of Commerce, the Secretary of Treasury, all the great individuals who are working incredibly hard to cut these good trade deals. And the president's deeply involved in this as well. He has made it clear to his trade team he wants to personally sign off on all of these deals too. And so I don't want to get ahead of them on announcements, but obviously, as you've heard from numerous administration officials, there have been many talks with countries. We've had more than 15 deals, pieces of paper put on the table, proposals that are actively being considered. And as we've said consistently, more than 75 countries have reached out. So there's a lot of work to do. We very much understand that, but we do believe that we can announce some deals very soon.
And then on Russia, can you say, did Russia agree to anything with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff?
I don't want to get ahead of those negotiations as well. What I can tell you is that they were a productive conversation was had. As the presidential envoy Steve Witkoff said last night, he believes that Russia wants to end this war, and the president believes that as well. There is incentive for Russia to end this war, and perhaps that could be economic partnerships with the United States, but we need to see a ceasefire first, and the president and the presidential envoy Witkoff made that very clear to the Russians. Gabe.
Thank you, Caroline. And I also want to thank your press office for releasing that information that you cited up there regarding the ICE arrests over the last couple of days. And I have them right here, but what I might ask is, why not release the same information for those who were deported to El Salvador?
Well, first of all, the information was released by the Department of Homeland Security. The individuals on the flights to El Salvador are foreign terrorists, and those are counterterrorism operations. They are much different than the arrests and final order of removals that you see on a day-to-day basis that law enforcement agents are conducting around the country.
That information was not, to that detail, was not released by DHS.
I just told you the reason. It's a counterterrorism operation, a deportation of foreign terrorists, not illegal criminals who have been convicted of heinous crimes living in our American communities. It's two different things. Foreign terrorist, illegal immigrant criminal, two different things, two different definitions. You should look them up. Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Does the president support raising the corporate tax rate to pay for all these other tax cuts he wants to see move through Congress?
Look, I've seen this idea proposed. I've heard this idea discussed, but I don't believe the president has made a determination on whether he supports it or not.
And then secondly, do you have any information on the status of Eden Alexander? Hamas says they lost contact with the unit guarding him following an Israeli airstrike earlier today.
I don't have updates. I have not seen that report, but I can certainly check in with our National Security Council. I have spoken to the president about Eden Alexander, and he's made it very clear to our national security team that finding him is a priority, but unfortunately I don't have any updates to share. But it's a very important matter, and certainly we can check in. Sure.
Hi. How concerned is the president that a federal judge could hold a Trump administration official in contempt of court for defying deportation orders?
We are complying with all court orders. So I see what you're trying to do there with that question, but we're very confident that every action taken by this administration is within the confines of the law, and we continue to comply with the court's orders. And you have seen that, and the president made that clear yesterday in the Oval Office with President Bukele. Sure.
Thanks, Caroline. Could you, just going back to El Salvador, could you just explain to us a little bit more about the legal basis on which you may be able to send U.S. citizens to prison there? I know you said President Trump is looking at it, but can you explain to us a little bit more about how that might be possible?
We're looking at it, and when I have more for you to share, I certainly will. Sure.
Still going off the El Salvador questions, yesterday in the Oval Office, administration officials made it very clear that El Salvador is responsible for Mr. Abrego Garcia, yet El Salvador's president said we're not going to do anything with him. So my question is, who is responsible for this man and where he's going to end up?
Well, first of all, President Bukele said that he is not going to smuggle a foreign terrorist back into the United States of America, as many in this room in the Democrat Party seemingly want him to do. Abrego Garcia was a foreign terrorist. He is an MS-13 gang member. He was engaged in human trafficking. He illegally came into our country. And so deporting him back to El Salvador was always going to be the end result. There is never going to be a world in which this is an individual who's going to live a peaceful life in Maryland, because he is a foreign terrorist and a MS-13 gang member. Not only have we confirmed that, President Bukele yesterday in the Oval Office confirmed that as well. So he went back to his home country, where he will face consequences for his gang affiliation and his engagement in human trafficking. I'm not sure what is so difficult about this for everyone in the media to understand, and it's appalling, truly appalling, that there has been so much time covering this alleged human trafficker and this gang member, MS-13 gang member. It's truly striking to me. Karen.
Thanks, Caroline. The president was posting on Truth Social today about helping American farmers. And last week in his cabinet meeting, he was talking about a plan to work with farmers to retain workers who are in the U.S. illegally, provided that they leave and then come back through what he said would be a legal process. Can you give details on what that would look like? How many workers he's talking about? How long a plan like that would take to implement, and the timeline for more details on getting this actually to implementation?
I can check in with our immigration and our policy team and get you some more details on that, Karen.
And is this something he wants to roll out soon? I mean, he was talking back and forth with Secretary Rollins.
Right.
This is kind of imminent that he wants to do this.
Yeah, look, the president is in constant communication with all of his cabinet secretaries, particularly Secretary Rollins, who has the backs of American farmers and ranchers. It's something that he spoke about with her in the front of all the cameras in the cabinet room, but I'll check in with not only our immigration team, but also with USDA, and we'll get you an answer. Jonathan.
Hi, Caroline.
Hi, it's good to see you in here.
You too. The president has long said that it would be an abuse of power for a president to direct prosecutors to investigate him. Last week, President Trump explicitly directed the Justice Department to scrutinize Chris Krebs to see if it can find any evidence of criminal wrongdoing. How is that not an abuse of power to direct the Justice Department to look into an individual, a named individual?
Look, that executive order, it's the position of the president in this White House that it's well within his authority to do it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have signed it. And he signed it, and that's his policy. Jeff, how you doing?
Fine, thanks. Thanks, Caroline. A follow-up on Harvard. The president floated on Truth Social, I believe, the possibility of removing tax-exempt status. How serious is that threat, and are there other universities he's considering? And then a follow-up question on foreign policy. Can you give us an update on what the president hopes to come from the next round of talks with Iran?
Sure. First, when it comes to Harvard, as I said, the president has been quite clear. They must follow federal law. He also wants to see Harvard apologize, and Harvard should apologize for the egregious anti-Semitism that took place on their college campus against Jewish American students. There were professors who said that he had engaged in discriminatory behavior against Jewish students. Of course, you had the former president of the university saying bullying and harassment depends on the context. You also had an encampment on Harvard Yard that we all saw play out before the cameras. The university failed to impose formal discipline on any students for this anti-Semitic conduct violations, including the occupation of a campus building and the disruption of classes with bullhorns. The president believes Harvard should apologize to its Jewish American students for allowing such egregious behavior. As for the tax-exempt status, I would defer you to the IRS for any updates. I do want to answer your question on Iran. Of course, the maximum pressure campaign on Iran continues, but as you know, the president has made it clear he wants to see dialogue and discussion with Iran while making his directive about Iran never being able to obtain a nuclear weapon quite clear. And the president spoke to the Sultan of Oman today, who helped facilitate these talks. I have a readout for all of you. He held a call with the Sultan of Oman today, and he thanked him for hosting the first direct meeting between the United States and Iran and emphasized the need for Iran to end its nuclear program through negotiations. The two leaders also discussed the United States' ongoing operations against the Houthis and emphasized that the Houthis will pay a severe price until they end their attacks on maritime traffic in the Red Sea. As you know, an additional negotiation between Steve Witkoff and Iran's representative has been scheduled for Saturday. And since these are ongoing negotiations, I have nothing more to add on that.
Thanks about Iran.
Sure.
Oh, thank you, Caroline. When you said that the president said that Iran will never have nuclear weapon, is the focus on dismantling the entire nuclear program, or it just restricting enriched uranium or the missile program?
The president does not want to see Iran have a nuclear program. He does not want Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. He's been very clear about this. Shelby. Shelby, you have a seat today.
I know. Stole it.
Glad to see it.
Two quick ones on TikTok. First, is the president expecting to extend the TikTok ban that's now June 19th if China doesn't come to the table in time?
Well, June 19th is a long ways away, obviously. I think it's 2 months away. 2 months is a long time in the Trump administration, as you have all seen. We work at Trump speed around here. We get a lot done, so definitely don't want to get ahead. The vice president continues to lead these negotiations and talks. The president's involved, and they're ongoing.
And then the president previously said he'd consider reducing tariffs on China if in order to get a TikTok deal done. Is that option still on the table?
Look, the president has made his position on China quite clear, although I do have an additional statement that he just shared with me in the Oval Office. The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country, except they are much larger. And China wants what we have, what every country wants, what we have, the American consumer. Or to put it another way, they need our money. So the president, again, has made it quite clear that he's open to a deal with China, but China needs to make a deal with the United States of America. Sure.
On tariffs, yesterday in the Oval Office...
Which outlet are you with?
The Canadian Public Broadcaster.
Oh, nice to see you.
Thank you. Yesterday in the Oval Office, President Trump suggested that there could be some help for automakers. I'm wondering what that looks like. Is it tariff relief on the 25% tariffs that are in place right now, or the new tariffs that are coming up in May on auto parts. And a second on Canada, if I may. President Trump's tone when it comes to Canada-U.S. relations, Canadians have noticed it's shifted a bit in the past few weeks. Ever since the election campaign started, he stopped talking about Canada becoming the 51st state, at least publicly. I'm wondering if that's on purpose and why.
I would reject the position on Canada has shifted. Perhaps he just hasn't been asked about Canada by questions from this group in the Oval Office, but they see him almost every day. But the president still maintains his position on Canada. The United States has been subsidizing Canada's national defense, and he believes that Canadians would benefit greatly from becoming the 51st state of the United States of America. As for autos and auto parts, I don't have anything to read out for you there, but I think the point the president was making is flexibility, and he has flexibility when it comes to negotiations and talks, but ultimately his goal in his fair trade deals that he is pursuing with many countries around the world is to put the American worker first. And we had automakers and auto workers here at the White House on Liberation Day who believe in this president and his negotiating ability to put them first and to bring those jobs back to the United States of America. And the president's been very clear about that in his conversations with the automakers as well. Deanna, go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline. One on Ukraine and one on China. On Ukraine, this past weekend, Zelensky offered an invitation to President Trump, extending an offer for him to visit Ukraine. Just wondering if there's any update on that. Has Trump seen that offer and what he's thinking about?
I don't know. I haven't talked to the president about that, or if he saw Zelensky's offer. I'm sure he did. I haven't spoken to him about it. I can ask him what he thinks. I certainly don't have any plans to share on a potential trip to Ukraine, though.
And then on China, this last week, Chinese officials were posting videos on social media sites depicting Trump, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk in AI-generated videos working in factories, putting together Nike shoes and iPhones and products like that. Does the White House, have they seen these videos? Do you guys have a response to that?
I've seen the videos. I'm not sure who made the videos or if we can verify the authenticity, but whoever made it clearly does not see the potential of the American worker, the American workforce. The president believes in the American people, and he knows that we have the best not only consumer base in the world, but also the best workforce in the world. And that's why he's so focused on bringing investments home and shoring up our critical supply chains and bolstering our manufacturing here as well. Brett.
Thanks, Caroline. Would the president support a ban on members of Congress trading stocks?
I'm certain that's something the president would be interested in looking at, and I can ask him if he would support such a bill. Sure. Yes.
I have a question about the president's post from this morning on farmers. He asked farmers to be patient and just hold on. But a lot of farmers that I've talked to in the last week or so have said, they're in the middle of spring planting season and that a trade war makes everything sort of up in the air. What would his message to them be? And also, is there anything specifically planned to provide relief like in President Trump's last term?
Yes, well, relief is being considered. Secretary of Agriculture, I know, has spoken to the president about that, and again, it's being considered. And as for the president's message to the farmers, he put it out himself. He could speak for himself much better than I can speak for him, and so I would just direct you to the statement he had telling the farmers again and reiterating his support for them and that he has their backs, which he certainly does. Kelly, in the back.
Thanks, Caroline. Two questions. The first one, a Georgia man was just arrested over alleged threats to kill Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. Reportedly, there is now increased security around the FBI Deputy Director. Can you talk about the level of threats against various administration officials? And then a second one on Biden.
I'm sorry to hear that. I had not seen that report. It's very unfortunately, and obviously the White House, the president, and the entire administration condemn any threats of violence against any administration officials or public officials on both sides of the aisle here in Washington, D.C. It shouldn't be tolerated, and we commend the local law enforcement agencies for arresting this individual.
Former President Biden, he's set to deliver his first major speech since leaving office tonight. He plans to talk about what I'm told will be Social Security under the current administration, closing of offices, longer wait times, harder for seniors and people with disabilities to access earned benefits is what Democrats have been saying today. I wanted to get the president's response, or if he plans to respond to this, and comments on what Democrats are calling cuts to Social Security.
My first reaction when seeing former President Biden was speaking doing tonight was, I'm shocked that he is speaking at nighttime. I thought his bedtime was much earlier than his speech tonight. I understand the topic of his speech will be Social Security. Let me make it very clear ahead of former President Biden's remarks. President Trump, is absolutely certain about protecting Social Security benefits for law-abiding, tax-paying American citizens and seniors who have paid into this program. He will always protect that program. He campaigned on it, he protected it in his first term, and he's back again to continue protecting it. On the topic of Social Security, I have some news before I let you all go. Later this afternoon, the president will be signing a presidential memorandum aimed at stopping illegal aliens and other ineligible people from obtaining Social Security Act benefits. The memorandum will direct the administration to ensure ineligible aliens are not receiving funds from the Social Security Act programs. It will expand the Social Security Administration's fraud prosecutor program to at least 50 U.S. attorney offices and establishes a Medicare and Medicaid fraud prosecution program in 15 U.S. attorney offices. The memorandum will also require the Social Security Administration Inspector General to investigate earning reports for individuals aged 100 or older with mismatched Social Security records to combat identity theft. And the memorandum will direct the Social Security Administration to consider whether to reinstate the use of civil monetary penalties against individuals who engage in Social Security fraud, an effort that has been paused for several years. These taxpayer-funded benefits should be only for eligible taxpayers. And President Biden should think about what he did in his last term, which is allow tens of millions of illegal people into our country, many of whom were fraudulently receiving these benefits. So you'll hear from the president on that later, and we will see you later in the East Room. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Caroline.